Hello, everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The house that should have been empty. My aunt owns a small, aging cabin just outside Leadville, Colorado. It sits far enough from town that you don't hear traffic, but not so far that it feels completely cut off from the world. At least that's what I always thought growing up. The place has been in our family longer than I've been alive. It was built sometime in the late 70s, back when ski towns were quieter and land was cheaper. The cabin has always felt tired, not haunted, just worn down. Old wood that creaks no matter how recently it's been reinforced. Doors that swell in winter and never quite close right. A furnace that works, but only after a few threatening clanks that make you wonder if this is the year it finally gives up. My aunt talks about selling it every few years. She never does. This happened when I was 9 years old. My cousin Evan was 12 at the time, and we were staying there over winter break while our parents worked remotely. A heavy storm had moved in that afternoon, the kind that blurs the sky into one flat white sheet. Snow fell so thick it felt like the world had shrunk to just the cabin and the trees around it. We weren't allowed to go far, but boredom always finds loopholes. Behind the cabin was a stretch of open land that sloped gently downward before cutting into dense forest. There was also an access road, unplowed, rarely used, and technically public. It ended about half a mile down near another property that no one ever seemed to visit. Evan and I made up a game. It wasn't anything creative, just a snow version of capture the flag. One of us would hide an object, the other would try to retrieve it without being spotted. He went first. He grabbed an old red glove from the mudroom and said he'd hide it near the other place. By that, he meant the neighboring cabin at the bottom of the access road. I remember hesitating. That cabin had always felt wrong. Not scary, just too quiet, too untouched. The driveway was always covered in snow, even late into the season, and the windows never had lights. Evan promised he wouldn't go near the house itself. He'd hide the gloves somewhere outside and whistle when he was ready. He disappeared down the road, his boots leaving clean impressions in the snow. The wind swallowed the sound of his footsteps almost immediately. I waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. At first I told myself the storm was making it hard to hear the whistle. The wind had picked up, shaking snow loose from branches in soft, sudden collapses. Still, I expected something, a sound, movement. Nothing came. I decided to head down myself. I didn't want to cut through the trees. The forest felt darker than it should have, even in the middle of the afternoon. So I followed the road, stepping carefully into Evan's old footprints, grateful they were still visible. As I got closer to the neighboring property, I noticed something immediately. There were more footprints now, not just Evan's. They came from the driveway, fresh and deep, leading toward the front door of the cabin. The snow on the steps had been cleared recently, which made my stomach tighten in a way I didn't understand at the time. I didn't see Evan anywhere. I scanned the area, calling his name once, then again, louder. My voice sounded thin and strange in the open air. Then I heard someone speak. "Are you looking for someone?" It was a woman's voice, calm, almost friendly. I turned toward the sound and saw her standing in the doorway of the cabin. She looked older to me then, maybe in her late 50s or early 60s, but memory has a way of exaggerating. She wore a thick gray sweater and no coat, which struck me as odd given the temperature. Her hair was pulled back tightly, and she smiled in a way that felt practiced. I nodded and said my cousin was playing outside. She tilted her head slightly. "He's inside," she said. That didn't make sense. Evan wasn't allowed inside that cabin. No one was. I took a few steps closer without realizing it, my boots crunching loudly. And as I did, I noticed movement in one of the upstairs windows. Someone was standing there, partially hidden by the frame. Their face was obscured, either by shadow or something dark pulled low over their head. For a brief, stupid second, I thought it might be Evan. Then I saw how still they were, not watching curiously, not waving, just watching. I also noticed something else, a second set of Evan's footprints. They led toward the house and then turned around, heading back toward the tree line. The woman was still smiling, but it felt tighter now. "You should come inside," she said. "Get warm." I yelled Evan's name. The woman's expression changed instantly. The smile vanished like it had never been there. Heavy footsteps echoed from inside the house, not rushed, not panicked, deliberate. I didn't wait to understand why. I ran. I followed my own footprints back up the road, my lungs burning, snow kicking up behind me. I didn't look back until I reached the bend near our cabin. That's when I heard my aunt's whistle, sharp, familiar, urgent. Evan came running out of the trees moments later, pale and shaking. Before I could say anything, he told me someone at the other cabin had tried to get him to come inside. Our parents went down there together. The door was locked, no lights, no answer. Later that night, another neighbor confirmed no one was supposed to be staying there. The owners hadn't been in town for months. To this day, I don't know who those people were, and I still don't understand why Evan's footprints turned back before he reached the house. My aunt didn't sleep that night. Neither did I, really. Not in the way people mean when they say they slept. I remember lying on the pull-out couch in the living room, listening to the cabin settle and snap with the cold, listening to the wind comb through the pines, and replaying that doorway scene like it was on a loop. Every time I blinked, I saw the woman smile. At some point after dinner, my aunt made cocoa for Evan and me and tried to keep things normal. She spoke in that careful, everything is fine voice adults use when they're trying to keep kids from spiraling. But Evan and me kept drifting back to the same details. The upstairs window, the footprints, how quickly the woman's face changed the moment I yelled his name. My uncle called the sheriff's office not long after they got back from checking the cabin. We could hear him through the thin walls, pacing with his phone pressed tight to his ear, repeating the same sentence like he didn't believe it himself. "There were people in the house. We saw them." A deputy came out later that evening. He didn't arrive fast. Weather was bad, roads were worse, but he did arrive, and that fact alone made everything feel more serious. He parked near our cabin, lights off, and walked up with his collar pulled high and his hat dusted in snow. He asked questions in a calm, routine way, like he'd heard 100 versions of a story like this. What time did you go outside? Which direction did you walk? Did you see a vehicle? What did the woman look like? When he asked me to describe her, I struggled more than I expected. It wasn't that I couldn't remember her face, it was that her face felt slippery, like my mind couldn't decide what it had really seen. I could describe her sweater, I could describe her hair pulled back, I could describe the way her teeth showed when she smiled. But the moment I tried to picture her eyes, I got that same dropping feeling in my stomach. The deputy wrote everything down anyway. Then he asked Evan for his version. Evan said he'd gone down the road, hidden the red glove near a stack of firewood by the side of the cabin, and started back when he heard someone call out to him. He said he'd thought it might be us, maybe my aunt calling us in early, until he realized the voice was coming from the other cabin. He said a man had been standing in the doorway then, not the woman, a man. Evan said the man didn't wave or shout, he just said, casually, like it was obvious, "Come inside for a minute, it's warmer." Evan told the deputy he'd shaken his head and kept walking, but the man had stepped down onto the porch like he was going to follow. That's when Evan turned off the road and cut through the trees back toward our cabin. The deputy asked if the man had said anything else. Evan hesitated, then admitted he'd heard something behind him after he left, footsteps in snow. Not close enough to be sure, but close enough that he didn't stop running until he saw our driveway. My aunt watched his face as he spoke, and for the first time I noticed she was holding her phone the way people do when they're ready to dial without thinking. The deputy told us they'd check the other cabin. He said it might be squatters. It might be someone who wandered in during the storm. It might be someone from the area who thought the place was empty and decided to use it for shelter. All of those explanations sounded reasonable. None of them explained the upstairs window. The deputy left, and my aunt kept all the lights on until the sky began to pale. Around midnight, another patrol vehicle came through. We heard it before we saw it. Tires crunching slowly, engines strained, the sound muffled by fresh snow. I didn't see what they found, if they found anything at all. We stayed inside. But I did hear the way my uncle's voice changed when he spoke to them the next morning. Not panicked, confused. He told my aunt, low enough that he thought Evan and I couldn't hear, that the deputy had said the cabin looked untouched when they arrived. Front door locked, no signs of forced entry, no lights, no heat, but there was evidence someone had been there, just not in the places we expected. They found the back door unlatched, and they found a few partial boot prints behind the cabin where the snow drifted deeper and didn't hold detail as well. That was it. No woman, no man, no sign of a vehicle, no clear trail. The deputy told my uncle something else too, something I didn't understand until years later. He said the footprints in the driveway could have been older than we thought, that wind can fill and shape prints in ways that make them look fresh. That explanation sounded like relief dressed up as logic, but it didn't answer the part that mattered. Because the woman's voice was real, and the way her smile turned off wasn't weather or wind or imagination. It was a reaction. We left early. We didn't finish the week. We didn't sled again. We didn't play outside unless one of the adults was watching from the porch. When we packed the car, my aunt locked the cabin twice, then walked the perimeter like she was checking a fence line. She kept staring down the access road. On the drive back to Denver, Evan tried to convince me it was probably nothing. He said maybe we misunderstood. Maybe the woman was a caretaker and the owners forgot to tell anyone. I nodded and let him talk because it was easier than arguing.
But later, when I asked my aunt about it, months later, when the snow had melted and the fear had faded into something duller, she said she'd contacted the homeowners directly. They hadn't hired anyone. They hadn't been there. They didn't know what we were talking about. They sounded genuinely shaken that someone might have been in their place. After that, my aunt stopped letting us walk down that road. She stopped referring to the other cabin as the other place. She started calling it that house. And every time we went back up in winter, I caught myself doing something I never did before. Counting. Counting cabins that had lights in the windows, counting cars in driveways, counting signs of life like they were proof the world was still normal. Because the scariest part wasn't that someone was in a cabin that should have been empty. The scariest part was how confident they were about getting a kid to step inside, like it had worked before.
Story 2. The trail that wasn't on the map. I've always associated winter with familiarity, routines, predictable danger. You know when roads are bad. You know when lakes aren't frozen enough. You know when the cold becomes something you have to respect instead of enjoy. That's why this still bothers me. This happened when I was 22, during my last winter living in Park City, Utah. I'd moved there after college for seasonal work, nothing glamorous. I worked mornings at a rental shop near the base of the mountain and picked up evening shifts wherever I could. Skiing wasn't just recreation anymore, it was background noise. I skied alone most days. Not because I didn't have friends, but because alone meant no compromises, no waiting at lifts, no debating runs, just moving until my legs burned and my head went quiet. That afternoon started like any other. Cloud cover was heavy, the kind that presses low and dulls sound. Visibility wasn't great, but it wasn't bad enough for closures. Most people stuck to familiar, groomed trails. I didn't. I liked side trails, the ones marked with small wooden signs half buried in snow, the ones people ignored because they didn't show up clearly on the big maps by the lifts. I'd already done a few glades runs when I noticed something strange. A trail marker I didn't recognize. It was nailed to a tree just off a known run, slightly crooked, the wood darker than the others. The arrow pointed down and to the right. The name carved into it was simple: Hollow Ridge. I stopped. I knew the mountain well enough by then to be confident about what should be there, and Hollow Ridge wasn't ringing any bells. I pulled out my phone and opened the resort map. Nothing. I zoomed in, checked adjacent runs. Still nothing. I looked back at the marker. It didn't look new. The edges were worn. Snow had settled into the grooves of the letters. I told myself it might be an old name, a retired trail, something locals used informally. That kind of thing happens. I stood there longer than I meant to, weighing whether to follow it or ignore it. The slope it pointed toward dipped sharply, disappearing between trees. The sensible choice was to stick to marked terrain, but winter has a way of making you feel like rules soften when the world looks empty enough. I followed it. The first 100 yards felt normal. The trees closed in, blocking wind. The snow was untouched, which thrilled me more than it should have. Every turn sent powder up around my knees. The trail narrowed quickly. Not dangerously narrow,
just enough that I had to commit to my line. Branches brushed my jacket. The sound of the main runs faded until all I could hear was my own breathing and the scrape of my skis. After a while, I realized something was off. There were no tracks, not old ones, not new ones. For a trail that supposedly existed, no one else had been there in a long time. The slope leveled out into a shallow basin. The trees thinned, opening into a wide bowl-like clearing surrounded by forest. I slowed instinctively. There was no lift noise here, no distant shouting, just quiet. I checked my phone again. No service. That wasn't unusual, but it made the silence heavier. I scanned the clearing, expecting to see signs of a path out on the other side, another marker, something. Instead, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. Footprints. Not ski tracks, boot prints. They crossed the basin in a loose line, uneven, like someone walking without a clear destination. They weren't deep, which told me they were recent. Fresh snow hadn't filled them yet. I followed them with my eyes. They didn't lead out of the clearing. They stopped near the center. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to convince myself someone had taken their skis off for some reason. Maybe a fallen binding, maybe a break. Then I noticed the second set. Heavier, more deliberate. They approached from the opposite side. The two sets overlapped briefly, then both turned towards the tree line to my left. A sudden wave of unease washed over me. Not panic, not yet, but that quiet sense that something was unfolding without my input. I should have turned around. I didn't. I followed the direction they'd gone, staying near the edge of the basin. I told myself I was just trying to find the trail exit. The trees thickened again. The ground sloped downward, steeper now. That's when I heard voices. Not shouting, just talking, low, muffled by distance and trees. I slowed until I was barely moving, listening. Two voices, both male. I couldn't make out words, just tone, casual, unhurried. That made it worse. I crept forward until I could see through a break in the trees. About 30 yards ahead, two men stood near a snowmobile. It was parked sideways across what looked like a narrow path. The engine was off. Neither of them were wearing ski gear. One had on a heavy canvas jacket and work boots. The other wore something darker, bulkier, with a hood pulled up. They weren't looking around. They were looking down at something on the ground between them. I couldn't see what it was. One of them laughed. The sound carried oddly, too clear, like the forest was funneling it towards me. My pulse picked up. This wasn't a rescue crew. They didn't have markings, no radios, no reflective patches. Just two men, a snowmobile, and a place that didn't feel like it should exist. I backed up slowly, careful not to snap branches or shift snow too loudly. That's when my ski pole caught under something beneath the powder. I froze. The laughter stopped. One of the men looked up. He didn't see me right away, but his eyes were scanning. I didn't wait for him to finish. I pushed hard, taking the slope faster than I was comfortable with, trusting muscle memory over caution. Branches slapped my arms. My skis clipped something buried, nearly sending me down. I didn't stop.
The trail twisted more sharply now, like it was guiding me somewhere, whether I wanted to go or not. I'd burst out onto a groomed run so suddenly I almost crashed into another skier. I didn't slow until I reached the lift. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped my pole trying to load. I rode up in silence, replaying the clearing, the footprints, the men. At the top, I skied straight down to the base. I didn't finish the day. I told a supervisor I felt sick and left early. That night, curiosity got the better of me. I searched for Hollow Ridge, trail maps, old forums, local groups. Nothing. The next morning, I went back to the spot where I'd seen the marker. It was gone. The tree was bare. No nail holes, no lighter patch of bark, just snow and bark like it had always been that way. I asked around. A few longtime locals shrugged and said they'd never heard of Hollow Ridge. One older guy at the shop paused longer than the others. He said, "You sure you didn't wander off boundary?" I told him no. He didn't argue. He just said, "Good," and changed the subject. I still ski, but I don't follow unmarked signs anymore. Because somewhere on that mountain, there's a place people walk into instead of ski. And I don't think it's an accident.
Something was moving on the ice. I never thought of winter as scary. Cold, sure. Inconvenient, definitely. But not threatening in a way that made your instincts light up. That changed a few years ago, during a stretch of February nights in northern Minnesota, near a small town outside. I was 26 then. I'd moved back temporarily to help my mother after my dad passed, and winter felt endless that year. The kind where the sun disappears early and never quite seems to come back with conviction. I had a friend named Marcus and another named Eli. We grew up together, and whenever I was back in town, we fell into old routines without thinking about it. One of those routines involved a frozen lake. It wasn't anything official, just a wide, shallow lake a few miles outside town, surrounded by sparse trees and nothing else. In winter, it turned into this open, white expanse that felt completely removed from everything. No traffic noise, no houses, no cell service if you walked far enough out. We'd go out there late at night sometimes, not to party, not to do anything reckless, just to stand on the ice, talk, and let the quiet settle around us. This happened on a night when snow had been falling steadily for hours. Thick, slow flakes, the kind that muffle sound and make distance hard to judge. Marcus drove us out in his old truck. We parked in a small clearing near the tree line and walked the rest of the way. It was cold enough that the lake felt solid under our boots. No cracking, no groaning. We didn't go far, maybe 100 feet from shore. The moon was high, bright enough to turn the snow blue-white. Everything felt still. For a while, it was just us talking, nothing unusual. Then Eli stopped mid-sentence. "Do you see that? he asked quietly. He was looking toward the far side of the lake. At first, I didn't see anything, just trees, snow, shadow. Then something moved. A dark shape near the tree line, low to the ground at first. It shifted slowly, deliberately, like it was testing the surface. My first thought was a deer, but deer don't move like that. The shape straightened, too tall, too upright. Marcus whispered, "Is that a person?" No one answered. The figure stepped onto the lake. Each movement was careful, measured, not slipping, not rushing, dragging something behind it. The longer we watched, the harder it was to breathe normally. The thing behind it left a faint line in the snow, thin, uneven, a rope or something like one. I felt a tightening in my chest that had nothing to do with the cold. The figure paused halfway onto the lake and looked up. Even from that distance, I knew it was looking at us. I don't know how I knew. I just did. None of us moved. The figure didn't wave, didn't call out. It just stood there, head tilted slightly, as if deciding something. Then it started walking again, toward us, slowly. Not aggressively, not sneaking, just approaching. That was enough. Marcus turned first, whispering, "We need to go now." We moved fast but carefully, trying not to slip. Snow crunched under our boots, loud in the silence. Behind us, the sound stopped. No footsteps, no dragging, nothing. That somehow felt worse. We reached the tree line and didn't stop until we were at the truck. Marcus fumbled with the keys, dropping them once, swearing under his breath. As soon as the engine started, headlights swept across the lake. The ice was empty. No figure, no trail, just falling snow. We drove back in silence. None of us brought it up until days later, and even then the conversation went nowhere. Maybe it was someone dumping trash. Maybe it was a hunter. Maybe it was nothing. But a few weeks after that night, a missing person report aired on the local news. A man from a nearby town, last seen walking near a frozen lake. The timing lined up uncomfortably well. I'm not saying they're connected. I know better to jump to conclusions. But I don't go out on frozen lakes at night anymore. Because sometimes winter doesn't hide things. Sometimes it gives them space.